And joining us once again, special guest Scott Brown from Edgewater Family Wealth. You can hear him on Sunday mornings with Ryan Holmes on It's Only Money at 8 o'clock in the morning. Let's put our hands together and welcome Scott. Yay!
Oh, yeah!
Oh, what a day.
That's what I love coming on this show. I don't get applause anywhere else I go.
You don't?
No, this is the only place.
See, it's great.
Yeah, so I appreciate that.
We train hard for that.
Yeah, you guys are desperate for information, apparently.
In a way, we kind of are.
Yeah.
Because, when the news broke early this week, I don't want to say it was no big deal, but for those who remember 2008, when it seemed like every industry, banking, automotive, but of course that was the big bank collapse.
Yeah, when the whole world was collapsing.
Exactly.
The whole financial world was collapsing. Yeah.
Like Ross said, find out why the year he graduated sucked so bad.
That is exactly how he put it, which I thought was perfect.
It was very apropos.
Yeah.
But for a lot of Americans, you really want to listen to the talking heads that say, don't panic, the banking sector is strong, but at the same time, you don't want to be caught off guard. So thank you for coming in and kind of explaining it and letting everyday folks like ourselves know, is this something we need to worry about? Does this look like 2008?
No and no. It does not look like 2008. I mean, obviously anything's possible and the world could end tomorrow for all I know. But it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So, this is an isolated thing. This particular bank, Silicon Valley Bank, as it's now known as SVB, which we're going to hear over and over and over again because people like to talk about bad stuff. The reality is this is isolated, and it's isolated for a variety of reasons. One, what they did. So they were Silicon Valley's primary banking institution. Money was put in there by venture capital, by private equity. And what essentially happened to them is they were kind of a victim of circumstance. They had some bad luck, which is part of capitalism. Yes, we do have bad luck from time to time.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. And
My mom a lot.
Yeah, see? Ross knows.
Yeah, a lot of bad luck.
A few of us in here know, we just don't want to talk about it.
Right, so
Like
what happened?
A fender bender that totals your car?
Yeah,
Kind of bad
exactly.
luck.
That happened to your mom?
No, that happened to Jack.
Oh, Jack.
Back to SVB.
No, sorry about that.
Yeah,
sorry.
Stan Van Bundy.
Gotcha. Exactly. So the reality is they were the victim of circumstance. They obviously mismanaged some things, but there was no fraud. There was no nefarious intent. What happened was they had a concentration of these private equity and venture capital firms with their money there. And once interest rates started to go up, they had their money somewhat put out to a 2 or 3 year treasuries. They didn't have the liquidity they needed. And when these venture capital and private equity companies said, hey, we need money, rather than going out into the environment they were used to getting them from everyday investors, retail investors, institutional investors, with rates as high as they were struggling to raise the capital to run their venture capital stuff.
Oh.
So what happened was they said, well, give us our money, right? So they had deposits on hand at this bank. And they said, look, we need, if 30 or 40 or 50 or 80 of them all at one time say, hey, we need $50 million, that came as a bit of a surprise, right? That's not typical. And the other thing you have to remember about this bank is it had very few mom and pop depositors, people like us who say, well, 250,000 I'm insured. They had very few of those people. Most of their depositors had 50 million or 30 million. And that's the difference between them and a normal bank, where a normal bank, 80 to 90% of their deposits would be small.
Yeah, Joe Schmoes.
Joe Schmo, if a bunch of Joe Schmoes need their $50 out of their account, the bank doesn't even blink. But if all of a sudden you're Joe Schmoes or Peter Thiel or venture capital firms, and they need 20 million or 30 million, that puts the stress on your system, and you have to sell a bunch of securities that you bought, in this case treasuries, at a discount because they didn't mature, and the whole thing starts to unravel.
And Scott, is that why when the White House came out and other financial officials, they talked more about those who invested in this and talked about who was going to be insured and who wasn't?
Yeah, so it gets weird here, right? So this is one of those things where it's capitalism on the way up, but not so much capitalism on the way down, right? So these people,
that sounds like life.
They want to make all the money on the way up, but if they screw up, could you help us out, right? We're all capitalists, rah, 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 cheering, pounding our chests on the way up, but then if something goes wrong, we're totally nanny state. Can you help us? We made a mistake, right?
Mom?
Yeah, exactly. Ross knows.
I messed up.
So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like, okay, well, we get that you're going to make depositors at 250 whole because that was the deal, right? That's the deal we made with the bank. If we give you 250, you promise to insure it. And we all say, yes, that's the deal. We get it. That's the game. But then these other people, these institutions put 100 million, 50 million, 20 million. Well, they're also being made whole. So some of us are like, is that really capitalism? Is that how it's supposed to work? And then the arguments go back and forth as to why they're doing that, and we can get into that in a second. But the important thing to note, one of the important things to note is that the investors in this bank, the bondholders of this bank, they're all kaput. Right. They're all being wiped out. But the question then doubles back to what is the moral hazard? You remember moral hazard from your economic textbook, Ross, of course, because you were really paying attention in that class.
I'm hoping he can explain it to me.
Moral hazard is when we teach people there are no consequences.
Oh, and you mean like politics?
Yeah, something like, say whatever you want, nobody's going to hold you accountable.
There's no rules. Or Wall Street in 08.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nobody went to jail, right? Literally, like one person went to jail. Yep. How they picked that random person, I have no idea.
Oh, come on, guys. It's just some guy named Larry who's just like in the back.
Yeah.
Who's the stapler guy from Office Space?
My stapler. Yes. Where's my stapler?
My stapler?
That guy, yeah. So he went to jail. But the moral hazard from this situation is, are we teaching people that you don't have to make sure that your bank's solid? Are we teaching people that you can have an overconcentration of depositors? So there's a lot of issues there.
Scott, we do have to take a break, but would you be willing to stay for another segment? Because there's still so much information I want to ask you about Credit Suisse, because that tends to be a name that people have heard more than maybe these smaller Silicon Valley banks, these more West Coast issues. Credit Suisse is a bigger name.
For sure.
Can you hang out with us for a little bit?
I can hang out.
Awesome. Well, then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to continue to tap the brilliant mind of Scott Brown from Edgewater Family Wealth as soon as we get back. So keep it right here on Real Radio 104.1.
I want to love somebody. I hear you need somebody to love.
Oh, that's taking us way back. Welcome back to the Jim Colbert Jim Colbert Show, on Real Radio 104.1. An hour and 40, Deb, an hour and 40. Like he said, Jim is off. He's taking some personal time. He'll be back with us on Monday. You've got Deb, Jack, you've got Ross, you've got Slick today. And for the next several minutes, we've got Scott Brown from Edgewater Family Wealth breaking down the national headlines of the banking sector and the fears this week. But he's also generously agreed to kind of offer up some, financial advice. Ross has been chewing on his ear during the commercial break about good debt versus bad debt and saving and what that means if you want to be an investment banker. But real quick, Scott, before we get to you, I did want to let everybody know if you'd like to help Jack out today with the rejoin music, he's looking for your requests for 90s music. And Jack, how do they make that happen?
Through the talkback feature on the free iHeartRadio app. You bring that up on your phone, you search Real Radio, and then tap the microphone. When you do that, you can record a message up to 30 seconds, but just identify yourself, make your request, and send it our way. We're getting a lot in, so trying to, one by one, bang them out, but, we'll run out of time at, 6:45. You'll hear the last one today.
Ooh, so the time is winding down, people. Yeah. Make your requests known. Scott, again, thank you so much. Now, before we went to break, we had talked about SVB.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Okay, yeah, mm-hmm. Silicon Valley Bank.
That's correct.
Or Stan Van Bundy.
Yep.
As well as a New York-based bank that had also fallen or collapsed earlier this week.
Mm-hmm. Well, went into receivership for the Treasury Department. Yeah.
For us common folk, I guess means failed, right?
Yeah, I don't like that word, but
no, because the people aren't losing their money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So when you say fail, it feels like everyone who is associated with it, lost everything. But it's just the government kind of, I would say,
took it over,
covering those bets,
making sure everyone is being covered.
So suspending operations until they get it sorted out. But yes, theoretically, the depositors will be made whole. And in that case, there were some crypto alignments that caused that problem. So each of these things is somewhat unique because people think, well, they all happened at the same time. But what it did was it just got the regulators kind of itchy. And they started going after things that they were concerned about to begin with. So if we go back to what happened with SVB, what happened was the rating service, in this case Moody's, was going to downgrade them.
Oh,
so they gave them heads up, hey, we're going to downgrade you. And they said, well, what can we do? And they said, well, you need to raise capital, right? So they went out and basically let their folks know they were raising capital, which caused panic.
Yeah.
That's when people started freaking out to say, wait a minute, why do you need to raise capital? Why are you doing it this way? And then Peter Thiel, who's one of the PayPal mafia billionaires and a little bit of a whack job, if you ask me, started running his mouth. And when he started running his mouth on Twitter, that's when people headed for the exit. So there's a lot of irresponsibility to go around here. But a lot of it's just really bad luck and bad timing.
But it's kind of predictable, though, when your bank is coming out and saying, like, hey, we need to have a fundraiser, and then your bank starts selling big treats.
Yes,
yeah,
they start their own,
and you're like, oh, where is my money?
they start their own GoFundMe page. That's
Yeah.
bad. That's a bad situation.
Yeah, that is a bad situation. So what about Credit Suisse? Because that's a much bigger name. Now, it isn't in receivership.
Correct.
But it was a name that was bandied about earlier this week. What can you tell us about that situation?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on the Credit Suisse issue, but I will tell you this. I've been in the business 36 years, and for the last decade, I have heard rumors and talk and gossip and bad vibes about Credit Suisse. They've had ongoing problems. The Swiss government's been on them. Our government's been on them. And now I guess the Swiss government's going to backstop them is what appears to be the case. They're not going to go into any kind of receivership. So I've heard so far. That's all I know. I'm not an expert on that situation, but it is totally unrelated to what's going on with SVB. So a lot of times people lump all these things together to make it into something it's not. Banks fail. I mean, every year banks fail. A bank or two will fail for a variety of reasons. In 08 or 09, there were lots and lots of banks that failed.
Right.
And that's where we get back into that. Which ones do we save and which ones do we not save?
But this is just really part of a normal cycle in the financial sector. It is not a harbinger of things to come, going back to 2008.
How's the pressure on that question?
Yeah. All right.
Safe, right?
Scott Brown's about to tell us whether we should do bunker stuff and
Well,
get
don't worry
ammunition.
about that.
Yeah.
No, Jack already covered the bunker stuff
Did he?
earlier when he talked about buying a lifeboat off of a cruise ship and retrofitting it for when the big flood comes.
Oh,
so
those
we've
are
already
cool.
covered that,
That's where
Scott.
I'm going to live, Scott.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
Get your zombie ammunition together. I get it. And, listen, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say nothing bad is going to happen, but I will say is this does not seem to be system-wide. From everything I've read, everything I've heard from the people, important and thoughtful people that I listen to. So I don't think you should be freaking out. I don't think you should be bearing gold coins under your house or stocking food or buying corn seed and gunpowder.
And you said, you said system-wide. Is it safe to say that in 2008 that is a system-wide?
That was systemic. That we were about to fail. Our banking system was about to fail. So yes, that was a bad deal, and that needed some intervention. There's going to be intervention here. There's obviously now politics are involved, and the red team and the blue team will take turns pointing fingers at each other to say, so you underregulated, you overregulated, and we'll have to listen to all that for the next 3 or 4 months. Probably in the election cycle, we'll have to listen to that again. But the reality is banks do fail. People make mistakes. Sometimes it's not nefarious. Sometimes they're just bad at being bankers.
Scott, this
just
is
like me and Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
This is I love being a banker in Monopoly. I just like the control.
Do you wear a monocle?
Yeah, I did not. I did not. It kept falling out. But the distraction allowed me to steal $500 bills.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Do not let him be the banker.
At all.
No.
Scott, you've been doing this a long time. So how did you handle 08 and navigate that, given that this is your profession? What was that like for you and your business?
Well, it's weird. I mean, we did okay. We came through it. Obviously, I came out the other side like a lot of people. It was nerve-wracking like it is for anybody because, at that point, everybody was in trouble, right? It wasn't just the real estate. It wasn't just stocks. It was everything. Everything was a bit of a mess because it's all kind of tied together, right? The liquidity of a nation. How do we do transaction? Is the ATM going to shut off? Is the exchange going to open tomorrow? These are all reasonable things to ask yourself when you're at what feels like the precipice of the end. And I mean, I'm a pretty rational, optimistic guy. To be 36 years in the investment business, you got to get out of bed every morning with some optimism. Hey, things are going to be okay, right? Because if your clients call up and like, how's it going? Oh man, this is terrible. This is never going to work out. I'm packing my stuff and going to Australia or something.
And that's when you sit Jack down and tell him it's going to be okay.
Yes, exactly.
Keep your boat in the backyard.
Hey, it's America. We figure, they say that Americans, I think it was Winston Churchill famously said Americans always do the right thing after they try everything else first. So we're going to, I think we're going to get to the point where things are going to work out.
Well, speaking of that, is there, the moral hazard, going back to that.
Yeah, you like that one.
Yeah, because it would be nice if that would change.
Well, it's, again, we are capitalists at heart. I think most Americans think, yeah, capitalism, we're all, but listen, we haven't had free market capitalism in over 100 years. We have social safety nets. We have regulations in place. We do back up banks sometimes when they get into trouble. The question then becomes, how do we make those decisions, right? How do we decide that Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers are going to fail, but Bank of America and Merrill Lynch are not? Right. Well, I mean, I think there's some politics involved and maybe some deposits of some kind. I don't know. But the reality is
exactly.
we must make these decisions. And I'm not a conspiracy person because, the same government you're accusing of conspiracies can't fill a pothole. So I don't think they're really all that adequate. Conspiracies aren't either. So, again.
That's a very good point, Scott.
Yes, you're welcome. That's some wisdom for you right there.
Yeah, but the conspiracy theorists would say, they can't fill up a pothole because they're too busy doing conspiracies.
There we go.
You can't defeat them. They always have. You know what they have on their side? They have faith.
Yes.
I believe this happened.
Yes, they do their quote unquote research. I know, but so yes, moral hazard is an issue. I think we can get into all kinds of you all start to feel like an old man, but we do have a problem in this country where we are convincing a fairly large number of people that it's okay to mess up. We'll just come in and take care of you.
It seems like the powers that allow that are the same powers that benefit from that, and yet the majority of those that could benefit from that don't.
Well, and it's both sides, right? It's the I call them the red and the blue team, right? Because the red and the blue team, they do it in different ways.
But they dip from the same pot.
They're dipping from the same pot. They're spending the one of them's like, well, we shouldn't spend money on this, and then they're spending money on that, and vice versa. So, I think they're both equally guilty. Politics has not changed in the 250 years this country's been around, and it ain't going to change tomorrow. So the rest of us just got to do what we do.
Hell, it hasn't changed since Caesar got stabbed in the back.
That is a fair point.
So rather than worry about what the powers that be are doing with their money, let's bring it down a little bit closer to home and maybe get some hands-on help. I know Ross has some questions I think could really benefit a lot of people, especially in this tax season. He had mentioned earlier that his wife is a realtor, so that presents interesting situation during tax time. I mean, Jack's wife is a performer, so a lot of gig workers in this town know what it means to be 1099 come tax time. But Ross, go ahead and kick it off with like the savings questions and stuff, because
I mean, there's too many questions to ask when it comes to money, I suppose. But the first, I guess one question that I've always had is that it's always bummed me out when I have my little, my nut, here it is in the bank, and I don't know what to do with it. I know when it sits there in a banking, in an account, it's losing value just because that's how, economics works. Inflation happens. What, $1,000 is today versus what it was 20 years ago is a very radically different $1,000.
Sure.
So I guess I'm essentially asking, where should that go? Do you believe in savings accounts?
Well,
of course.
Before you get his answer, why don't you ask him how many people he's turned into millionaires?
Whoa, what?
Yeah.
Scott?
I think that's a trick question.
No. Isn't that your book?
Yes.
I've never made anyone a millionaire.
I've never made anyone rich.
Yeah. Oh, that's it.
Well, I'm not looking.
Is that a bad title?
No, that's awesome.
I love it.
I'm not even
conversation starter.
I'm not looking to get rich. What I am looking to do is to not go backwards, which is what essentially my savings account is doing as it grows no interest and just loses value.
So the reason I called my book, the title of my book is I've Never Made Anyone Rich, is because that's I don't make people rich. I deal with wealthy people and their money, but I didn't make them rich. If they're rich, it's because of something they did. And that's the first thing people have to realize is advisors, stockbrokers, insurance agents, gold coin sellers on TV. It doesn't matter. They don't make people rich. You're rich because you're disciplined and you're thoughtful. Right? If you're anything other than responsible and thoughtful, you might become rich for a second. You might inherit some money. You might win the lottery. We know that 35% of all lottery winners are broke within the first 5 years, right? So it's money happens and is accumulated because somebody is responsible, practical, and disciplined. And what I would say about your savings account is it's okay that you're not getting rich off your savings. I have a savings account. I'm a financial advisor. You would think, well, a financial advisor would never have a savings. Well, I do, right? Because I have backup money that I don't. Yes, it might only 2 or 3 or 4%, and that's not going to keep up in the, but I don't care. It's there so that once I get a pot of money that I know if the roof blows off or the transmission goes out or the air conditioner blows up, I got cash aside to meet those needs or some kind of medical emergency. I can then stop focusing on that, accept the fact that it's not going to grow a lot, and focus on the things that will grow. My risk assets, real estate. You know, your wife's a real estate agent.
Yeah.
Somewhere out there is a small, cruddy little house that somebody doesn't think much of and wants to get rid of that you can fix up a little bit with a little blood, sweat, and tears. Again, discipline and responsibility.
Yeah, her blood, sweat, and tears.
Her blood, obviously her. You're not going to do that because you got things to do.
No, she has boots.
Yeah.
I wear slides.
Right. So that's never going to work out. But let her do that work, put some renters, and she does this too. She puts the renters in there.
Right,
and
all of it.
And then she fixes the toilet when it breaks, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. Here, where's the plumber? It's right
But
here, babe.
this is how you guys get rich. You never leave the couch. She does a lot of work. You have renters, and that's how that happens. But you did that all because you had this pot of savings over here that gave you the peace of mind to take the risk that you were now taking.
Okay. Now I would like to build a studio at my house with my fiance and I. Sometimes it's been recommended, just pull some of the equity out that you've built up into the home, but neither of us are comfortable with that. It just seems riskier than it needs to be for something that's not that important. Savings again?
Well, I mean, what is the purpose of the studio? Is it
art studio for me?
Art studio.
Yeah,
so
it's not taking over the kitchen.
It's not a profit generating thing. This is something you're doing for fun and for enjoyment, which there's value in. Right?
Well, hopefully increasing the value of the home.
So that's the math you got to do. You got to say, look, if I put an art studio over here and I spend $25,000 to do that, and I take that equity out of my house, that's going to cost me 5 or 6% because that's what the bank's going to charge me, right? Is that at the end of the day going to add the associated value to my house? The answer to that is maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
That's a pretty big maybe.
But it's not terrible debt. I wouldn't call it good debt, but I wouldn't call it terrible debt. Terrible debt's easy. That's cars, that's depreciable assets, that's credit cards. Those are bad. If you have assets backing your debt that are legitimate, growing, like a house, like a piece of property, yeah, it's still debt, and yeah, it still doesn't feel great, but the reality is it's backed by an asset. You should eventually be fine. If it's a piece of real estate that Ross's poor wife is going to have to work on, eventually that will appreciate, and the renters will pay your mortgage. I'm not one of those advisors that thinks you can only buy stocks and bonds. Real estate is an asset class.
Yeah, absolutely.
People get all bent out of shape about right or wrong, good or bad. There's no good or bad. Stocks can be good, stocks can be bad, bonds can be good, bonds can be, real estate can be good. Listen, it's like, if you got a hammer, everything seems to be a nail, right? You can pound a nail with a hammer, but you can't wash a window with it. A hammer's not bad, it's not good, it's just for a specific thing. So what I can't stand is when people get all bent out of shape about something being good or something being bad. It's a matter of how you use it and you apply discipline and responsibility to your process.
And that's the kind of expertise you can. Oh, Jack, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask about Sunday. What do you got coming up this Sunday, and what's Ryan Holmes really like?
Come on.
Well, that's we need like 3 shows for Ryan.
Oh.
The complexity of Ryan Holmes,
Right?
I mean, first of all, he's brilliant.
He is?
A lot of people, think he hides it well, but but he's actually one of the smartest dudes I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
But the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the bank. I'm sure that's going to be part of the show. We're going to talk about purchasing stocks. A lot of people have a process for purchasing stocks that involves a dart and a dartboard. And we're going to try to help people get away from that strategy. But, we're going to cover soup to nuts this week. I think we're going to cover the banks and stock picking and things like that.
And that's what you can hear on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. It's Only Money with Scott Brown and Ryan Holmes. Scott Brown from Edgewater Family Wealth. Thank you so much for not only coming in today, but giving us a little bit of extra of your time so that we could, get some of these questions answered.
Loved it.
You feel better, Ross?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure Olivia doesn't.
Oh,
but
poor Olivia.
Poor Olivia.
Here's the thing. She's not poor because she's with me. She's poor because she's buying the second house.
Yes,
And working on it.
So we're going to get her opinion on that.
Exactly.
And remember, don't panic, although we are doomed.
Right, there we go.
I just want that clear.
These are wise words.
That's Jack Bradshaw in a nutshell.
Exactly.
Don't panic. We're doomed, and somehow I feel bad about it.
Well, like you said yesterday, just feel less worse about it. Don't care as much.
Yeah. Just cut your care in half.
There you go. Yeah. Although I still have a feeling Jack's going to go buy gunpowder and corn seed during the commercial break.
I'm on Amazon right now getting it.
But it is hard to convince people that you're cutting your care in half when you're crying. mine. So just a heads up.
You got to take care of that.
I don't care.
I got plenty of boxes to store that back there somewhere.
Yeah, and clearly people are rich, right? Or wealthy. You don't have to be rich. I like the term wealthy better. I mean, to rich reminds me of like the Monopoly guy or something. But, you know, there are people, there are regular people.
Now that guy I trust. You
Yeah,
see, the
no.
problem, Scott, you don't have a monocle.
Monocle is, now, if you meet a guy with a monocle, I mean, like, I'm all in.
What was his financial advice? He said buy Park Place?
I don't, where is that?
Where is that? I can't find it.
Tune in to It's Only Money with Scott Brown from Edgewater Family Wealth, Sunday mornings at 7 on Real Radio 104.1. Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Edgewater Family Wealth is not a broker-dealer, is independent of RJFS.